5 years had passed since Jack watched Lyra's escape pod disappear into the chaos of battle. The war that had seemed like it might end quickly had grown into something much larger and more terrible. What began as a conflict between humanity and a few alien species had expanded into a galaxy-wide struggle for survival. Jack Collins was no longer the young sergeant who had found a dying alien girl in the ruins of Outpost 7. He now wore the rank insignia of a full colonel, earned through countless battles and impossible victories. His chest was covered with medals and commendations, but Jack took no pride in them. Each one represented friends he had lost and choices he wished he had never been forced to make. The human fleet had grown from a few dozen ships to thousands, of vessels spread across dozens of star systems. Humanity had proven to be remarkably adaptable in warfare, learning quickly from each encounter and improving their tactics with each battle. What they lacked in advanced technology, they made up for in creativity and determination. Jack commanded the Fifth Fleet, one of humanity's most elite formations. His ships were crewed by veterans who had survived years of fighting, men and women who trusted their commander completely. They called him Lucky Jack because of his ability to win battles that seemed impossible. But Jack knew it wasn't luck that kept him alive. The secret to Jack's success was something he had learned from a small alien girl 5 years ago. Remembered Lyra's words about different kinds of strength, about how intelligence and compassion could be more powerful than physical force. Jack had applied these lessons to warfare, using strategy and understanding instead of brute force whenever possible. Where other commanders saw only enemies to be destroyed, Jack saw patterns and motivations. He studied each alien species they encountered, learning their cultures and their weaknesses. He found ways to turn their own strengths against them, using their rigid thinking and predictable tactics to outmaneuver them in battle. The alien coalition had grown as well, adding new species to their alliance with each passing year. The Kreks, with their massive warships, the Solari with their advanced shields, the Thren with their swarm tactics, and dozens of others. They all shared one thing in common. They viewed humanity as a disease that needed to be eliminated from the galaxy. But humanity had proven harder to kill than anyone expected. Human colonies spread across the galaxy like wildfire, each one defended by citizens who refused to surrender. When the aliens destroyed one settlement, 3 more would appear somewhere else. When they captured human prisoners, those prisoners would somehow escape and return with valuable intelligence. Jack's personal quarters aboard the flagship Endurance were sparse and functional. The only decoration was a small crystal pendant that sat on his desk, catching the light from the overhead panels. Every morning, Jack would look at the pendant and remember the friend who had given it to him. He wondered if Lyra had survived her journey to the neutral zone. If she was still alive somewhere in the vast galaxy, the pendant had become Jack's good luck charm, though he never told anyone about its true origin. His crew assumed it was a trophy from some battle, a piece of alien technology he had captured. Jack never corrected them. The truth was too precious and too dangerous to share. Captain Lisa Morgan knocked on Jack's door and entered when he called for her to come in. She was his second in command, a brilliant tactician who had served with him for 3 years. She had short brown hair and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. "Sir, we've received new orders from Fleet Command," Lisa said, handing him a secure datapad. "We're being reassigned to the Veiltur front." Jack felt his heart skip a beat at the mention of the Veiltur Empire. It was the first time in 5 years that he had heard that name spoken aloud. He tried to keep his expression neutral as he read the orders, but his mind was racing. "The Veiltur have been quiet for months," Jack said carefully. "Intelligence reports suggest they're preparing for a major offensive." "Yes, sir," Lisa replied. "Command wants us to probe their defenses and gather information of their capabilities. The Veiltur are considered one of the most dangerous members of the coalition." Jack nodded, though inwardly he felt conflicted. The Veiltur were Lyra's people, the ones who had cast her out because of her physical weakness. Part of him hoped they would find evidence that she had survived and made it home. Another part of him feared what he might discover about her fate. The journey to the Veilter sector 2 weeks. During that time, Jack studied everything the Human Intelligence Services had gathered about Lyra's species. The Veilter were described as a warrior culture that valued strength above all else. Their society was built around military hierarchy, with the strongest individuals rising to positions of power. What struck Jack as strange was how little information they had about the Veilter royal family. Most alien species were eager to publicize their leaders, but the Veilter seemed secretive about their ruling class. There were rumors of internal conflict within the Empire, but no concrete details. Jack's fleet arrived at the edge of Veilter space and immediately began reconnaissance operations. Their ships moved carefully through the outer systems, scanning for enemy patrols and defensive installations. What they found was puzzling. The Veilter defenses were not what anyone had expected. Instead of the aggressive forward-positioned fleets that characterized their previous tactics, the Veilter had pulled back to defensive positions around their core worlds. Their ships were arranged in careful formations that emphasized protection rather than attack. "It's like they're afraid of something," Lisa observed as she studied the tactical displays. "This isn't the same Veilter Empire we fought 2 years ago," Jack agreed. Something had changed within the Veilter leadership, but he couldn't determine what. The intelligence reports spoke of a new faction gaining power within the Empire, one that advocated for different strategies than the traditional warrior approach. During their 3rd week in Veilter space, Jack's fleet encountered a small convoy of alien ships that had been damaged in a battle with pirates. The vessels were requesting assistance, broadcasting distress signals on standard emergency frequencies. It was exactly the kind of situation that would normally result in a quick battle. But Jack remembered Lyra's words about helping those in need, regardless of who they were. Against the advice of his staff, he ordered his ships to provide assistance to the damaged vessels. The Veilter crews were suspicious at first, but they accepted the help when it became clear that the humans had no hostile intentions. As the human engineers worked to repair the alien ships, Jack found himself studying the Veilter crew members. They were tall and graceful, with the same pale blue skin and violet eyes that he remembered from Lyra. But these were warriors, strong and confident in a way that Lyra had never been. The Veilter captain was a female named Commander Zara, who spoke excellent English. She thanked Jack for his assistance, but seemed puzzled by his actions. "Why do you help us?" she asked. "We are enemies. Our species are at war." Jack thought about his answer carefully. "Because you needed help, and we were able to provide it." "Sometimes that's reason enough." Commander Zara studied Jack with intense violet eyes. "You speak like someone who has learned wisdom from unusual sources. That is not common among your military leaders." "I had a good teacher once," Jack replied, touching the crystal pendant in his pocket. "She taught me that strength comes in many forms." Something in Jack's words seemed to surprise Commander Zara. She looked at him with new interest, as if she had recognized something familiar in his philosophy. But before she could respond, the repairs were completed, and it was time for both fleets to move on. As the Veilter ships departed, Jack wondered if he had made the right choice. His act of mercy might be reported to the Veilter High Command, potentially giving them valuable intelligence about human capabilities. But he had followed his conscience, just as Lyra had taught him to do. The war continued to rage across the galaxy, but Jack carried with him the memory of a small alien girl who had shown him that enemies could become friends and that compassion was never wasted. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, he hoped she was still alive, still fighting in her own way to make the universe a better place. Jack Collins had no way of knowing that his act of kindness toward the Veilter convoy had been reported to the highest levels of the Empire, or that it would soon bring him face to face with the one person he had never stopped thinking about. The peaceful days at the mining facility came to an abrupt end when Jack's long-range scanners detected incoming ships. Multiple vessels were approaching from different directions, and their signatures showed both human and alien forces. Jack's heart sank as he realized their hidden sanctuary had been discovered. Lyra, we have to go, Jack said urgently as he burst into the medical bay where she was resting. Ships are coming. Both sides. Lyra's violet eyes widened with fear. She had grown stronger over the past month, but she was still weak and pale. The journey to this place had taken everything out of her, and she knew she couldn't survive another long trip through space. Jack helped to their feet and grabbed the emergency supplies he had prepared for this moment. He had always known this. Day would come, but he had hoped they would have more time together. Their friendship had become the most important thing in his life, and the thought of losing her filled him with dread. They made their way through the facility's corridors toward the escape pod bay. Lyra moved slowly, leaning on Jack for support. Her breathing was labored, and he could see the effort it took for her to keep moving. The infection from her wounds had never fully cleared, and she was running on determination alone. Jack, Lyra said softly as they walked, I cannot make long journey. Body too weak. Jack's jaw tightened. Don't talk like that. We'll find a way. We always do. But even as he said the words, Jack knew she was right. The nearest neutral zone was weeks away, and Lyra barely had the strength to walk across the facility. The escape pod's life support systems were basic, designed for short trips to nearby stations. She would never survive the journey. They reached the pod bay just as the first explosions rocked the facility. The attacking forces had arrived and were already engaging each other in battle. Plasma fire lit up the darkness outside the windows, and the facility shook with each impact. Jack quickly powered up the only functional escape pod and helped Lyra inside. The small craft was cramped and uncomfortable, with barely enough room for one person. Lyra settled into the pilot's seat, her hands shaking as she familiarized herself with the controls. These are the coordinates for the neutral zone, Jack said, programming the navigation system. The pod has enough fuel to get you there, but you'll need to conserve power. Turn off all non-essential systems once you're clear of the battle. Lyra nodded, but Jack could see the fear in her eyes. She knew as well as he did that she might not survive the journey. Her body was too weak, her injuries too severe. This might be the last time they would see each other. Jack, Lyra said, reaching into her clothing to pull out the crystal pendant she had tried to give him before. Please take this. It's very important to me. Jack shook his head. Keep it. You might need it. No, Lyra insisted, pressing the pendant into his hands. This is royal sigil of Veilter Empire. If someone find you with this, they know you are. Friend to Princess Lyra. Maybe someday it'll help you. Jack looked at the beautiful crystal, its surface shimmering with an inner light. I don't understand. Why would this help me? Lyra smiled weakly. It's more than just pretty stone. Has special meaning. If you ever meet my people again, show them this. They will know you are under my protection. Jack carefully placed the pendant in his pocket, next to where he had kept it before. I'll keep it safe, but I'd rather have you keep it and stay alive. Another explosion shook the facility, this one much closer. Through the pod bay windows, Jack could see the battle intensifying. Human and alien ships were locked in deadly combat, their weapons lighting up the darkness. Soon, the fighting would reach the facility itself. You must go, Lyra said, her voice breaking. It's dangerous for you to stay. Jack knelt beside the pod, bringing himself to eye level with Lyra. I don't want to leave you. We're friends. Friends don't abandon each other. Tears began to form in Lyra's violet eyes. You not abandon me. You save me. You show me that I have worth, that weak person can be strong person. You change how I see myself, how I see everything. You changed me too, Jack said softly. You showed me that the enemy isn't always who we think it is. That sometimes the people we're supposed to fight are just scared and hurt and need help. Lyra reached out and took Jack's hand in both of hers. Her skin was cold and her grip was weak, but her touch was gentle and warm. Promise me something, Jack, anything. Promise you will remember me, not as alien enemy, but as friend. Remember that somewhere in galaxy, there is person who cares about you, who thinks you are good man." Jack felt tears stinging his eyes. "I promise, I'll never forget you, Lyra. Never." "And I promise to remember you," Lyra said. "Remember human who chose to help instead of hurt, who showed kindness when he could have shown cruelty. You are best person I ever meet." The facility shook again, and this time the lights flickered and went out. Emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in red light. Jack could hear the sound of metal tearing as the structure began to fail under the assault. "You have to go now," Jack said, reaching for the pod's door controls. "I'm sorry, Lyra. I'm so sorry." "Do not be sorry," Lyra said, her voice steady. "Despite her tears, you give me greatest gift anyone can give. You give me hope. You show me that universe has good people in it, people worth fighting for." Jack sealed the pod's door and activated the launch sequence. Through the small window, he could see Lyra's face one last time. She was smiling through her tears, trying to be brave for him. Jack placed his hand against the window, and Lyra pressed. Her small hand against the other side, the pod launched with a soft hiss, disappearing into the chaos of the battle outside. Jack watched until he could no longer see it among the explosions and weapon fire. Somewhere out there, his friend was flying toward an uncertain future, alone and afraid, but carrying with her the lessons he had taught her about strength and hope. Jack made his way back through the facility toward the docking bay where his squad ship was waiting. The structure was falling apart around him, torn by weapons fire and secondary explosions. He had to climb over fallen debris and squeeze through twisted passages, but he was determined to reach safety. As he ran, Jack felt the weight of the crystal pendant in his pocket. It was all he had left of Lyra, a small piece of beauty in a universe full of violence and hatred. He would keep it safe, just as he had promised. And if he ever met her people again, he would show them that he had been a friend to their princess when she needed one most. Jack reached his ship just as the facility began to break apart completely. His squad was relieved to see him alive, but they were too busy escaping the battle to ask many questions. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, Jack took one last look at the mining facility where he had spent the happiest month of his life. The structure was gone, torn apart by the fighting. The battle was already moving on to other locations, other targets. But somewhere in the darkness of space, a small escape pod was carrying the most important person in Jack's life toward an uncertain future. Jack touched the crystal pendant one more time and made a silent promise. He would remember Lyra not as an enemy or a victim, but as a friend who had trusted him with her life. And if fate ever brought them together again, he would be ready to help her once more. The war would continue, but Jack carried with him the memory of a small alien girl who had shown him that friendship could exist even between enemies. It was a lesson he would never forget, and one that would guide him through all the dark days to come. 3 days after launching Lyra's escape pod, Jack received new orders. His squad was being reassigned to patrol the Outer Rim, while another unit took over the outpost. Jack felt relieved as they left the destroyed station behind. He had been checking the long-range scanners constantly, worried that someone might have detected the pod's launch. The crystal pendant remained hidden in Jack's personal gear. He found himself touching it often, wondering if the alien girl had made it to safety. The navigation system should have taken her to the neutral zone, but space was dangerous and full of unknowns. Jack tried not to think about what might have happened to her. 2 weeks later, Jack's patrol ship received a distress signal from an abandoned mining facility in the Kepler belt. The signal was weak and intermittent, coming from a location that should have been empty. Jack's commanding officer ordered them to investigate, suspecting it might be a trap. The mining facility was old and run down, built by human corporations decades ago and abandoned when the ore ran out. The massive structure drifted silently through space, its solar panels dark and its docking bays empty. Jack's team approached cautiously, Scanning for any signs of life or enemy activity, they found the source of the distress signal in the facilities. Medical Bay. It was a basic automated beacon, the kind used by civilian ships in emergencies. Someone had jury-rigged it to work with the facility's power systems. Jack felt his heart skip a beat as he realized who might be responsible. Jack volunteered to investigate the signal alone while his squad secured the docking bay. He made his way through the dark corridors, following the beacon signal. The facility's artificial gravity was still working, but the air was thin and cold. Jack's breath formed clouds as he walked. He found her in a small room that had once been a medical treatment center. Lyra was lying on a makeshift bed, surrounded by supplies from her escape pod. She was alive, but barely. Her wounds had reopened during the journey, and she was running a high fever. The medical supplies from the pod were nearly exhausted. Lyra's eyes opened when she heard Jack's footsteps. For a moment, she seemed confused, as if she thought she was dreaming. Then recognition dawned on her face, and she tried to sit up. Jack quickly moved to her side, gently pushing her back down. "Easy," Jack said softly. "You're safe now." Lyra spoke in her own language, her voice weak but filled with emotion. Jack wished he could understand her words, but her tone said everything. She was grateful, relieved, and perhaps a little surprised that he had found her. Jack examined her, conditioned, and realized she was much worse than when he had first found her. The journey to the facility had taken its toll, and she was suffering from infection and blood loss. Without proper medical care, she would die within days. Jack activated his communicator and called his squad leader. He reported finding a survivor in the facility and requested permission to treat her injuries. He carefully avoided mentioning that the survivor was an alien. His commanding officer agreed, assuming it was a human colonist who had somehow survived the initial attack. Over the next several days, Jack spent every free moment caring for Lyra. He brought her food, water, and medical supplies from the ship. He cleaned her wounds and changed her bandages. Slowly, she began to recover. As Lyra grew stronger, she began trying to communicate with Jack. She would point to objects and say their names in her language, then listen as Jack said the human word. Jack found himself looking forward to these lessons. Lyra was intelligent and learned quickly, picking up basic English words within days. "Water," Lyra said one day, pointing to Jack's canteen. Her pronunciation was careful and precise, with a musical quality that made even simple words sound beautiful. "That's right," Jack replied, smiling. "Water." Lyra smiled back, pleased with her progress. She pointed to herself and said, "Lyra," then pointed to Jack and said, "Jack." They had established the basics of communication. As days turned into weeks, Jack learned more about Lyra's background. Through broken English mixed with gestures and drawings, she explained that she was from a place called the Velter Empire. She was royalty, a princess, but her people considered her weak and worthless because of her frail body. "Strong important," Lyra explained one day, flexing her thin arms to show how weak she was. Lyra not strong, family not want. Jack felt anger rising in his chest. How could anyone reject their own child for something she couldn't control? He had seen Lyra's intelligence, her kindness, and her determination. Physical strength wasn't everything. "Strong here," Jack said, pointing to his head. "And here," he added, pointing to his heart. "You are strong, Lyra." Lyra looked confused by this concept. In her culture, only physical strength mattered. Leaders were chosen for their ability to fight and dominate others. The idea that intelligence and compassion could be forms of strength was foreign to her. Jack began sharing stories about human heroes who had changed the world through their minds rather than their muscles. He told her about scientists who had cured diseases, inventors who had created amazing machines, and leaders who had inspired others through their words and ideas. "Humans think different," Lyra said one day, her English improving rapidly. "Weak person can be strong person." "Yes," Jack replied. "Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who help others, who refuse to give up, who choose to be kind even when it's hard. This concept fascinated Lyra. She asked Jack to tell her more about human culture, about how they chose their leaders and how they treated those who were different. Jack found himself sharing stories about democracy, about protecting the weak, and about the human belief that every person had value regardless of their abilities. Lyra told Jack about her own experiences growing up in the Veilter Empire. She had been hidden away from public view, considered an embarrassment to the royal family. Her brothers were all mighty warriors, while she could barely lift a sword. She had been given the best education available, but her knowledge was considered worthless compared to physical prowess. "I study many things," Lyra said. "Language, science, history." But no one listened. "They say smart not important, if body weak." Jack shook his head. "They're wrong. Intelligence is one of the most important things you can have. It's what makes you special." Lyra looked at Jack with wonder. No one had ever told her she was special. Before, her own family had made her feel like a burden, a mistake that should be hidden away. But this human saw value in her that her own people couldn't see. As the weeks passed, Jack and Lyra developed a deep friendship. They shared meals, stories, and dreams for the future. Jack learned about Lyra's love of music and art, things that were considered frivolous by her warrior culture. Lyra learned about Jack's family back on Earth, his hopes for peace, and his belief that all people deserve to be treated with dignity. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars through the facility's observation window, Lyra asked Jack a question that had been bothering her. "Why you save me? I am enemy. You should kill, not help." Jack thought about his answer carefully. "Because you're not my enemy. You're just a person who needed help. That's what humans do. We help each other." Lyra was quiet for a long moment. "Veilter, not do this. We only help a person strong, useful. You help because I am person, not because I am useful." "That's right," Jack said. "Every person has value, no matter who they are or where they come from." This conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Lyra began to see herself differently, not as a burden or a failure, but as someone with worth and potential. Jack's kindness had planted a seed in her mind, an idea that would grow and change her entire worldview. The bond between them grew stronger each day. They were no longer just human and alien, soldier and enemy. They were friends who understood each other in a way that transcended species and culture. Jack had shown Lyra that strength came from compassion, and she had shown him that wisdom could flourish even in the most unlikely places. Neither of them knew that their time together was running out, or that the lessons they were learning would soon change the fate of entire civilizations. The metal corridors of Outpost 7 echoed with the sound of Jack Collins' boots as he moved through the wreckage. Smoke filled the air and sparks flew from damaged power lines hanging from the ceiling. The attack had been swift and brutal, leaving nothing but twisted metal and broken dreams behind. Jack held his rifle ready as he checked each room for survivors or enemies. The war had been going on for 3 years now. Humanity had ventured into space only to find they were not alone and not welcome. The alien coalition had made it clear that humans were a threat that needed to be removed. Jack had seen too many good people die in this conflict. His squad had been sent to security outposts after the aliens retreated, but they found only death and destruction. Jack's orders were simple: eliminate any remaining alien forces and secure the facility. No prisoners, no mercy. The aliens had shown none to the human colonists who lived here. Men, women, and children had all been killed without regard. The sight of their bodies still haunted Jack's dreams. As he rounded a corner, Jack heard a soft whimper coming from behind a pile of debris. He raised his weapon and moved closer. The sound came again, weak and pained. Jack pushed aside some broken metal panels and found a small alcove where someone had been hiding. Inside the space was a young alien girl, no more than 16 by human standards. She was curled up in a ball, her pale blue skin covered in cuts and bruises. Her breathing was shallow and labored. She wore what looked like expensive clothing, though it was now torn and stained with blood. Her large violet eyes looked up at Jack with fear and resignation. Jack had never seen this type of alien before. She was much smaller than the warriors he had fought, with delicate features and long silver hair. Her hands were tiny, almost childlike, and she seemed to weigh no more than a human child. Unlike the fierce aliens he had encountered in battle, this one seemed completely helpless. The girl spoke in a language Jack didn't understand. Her voice was soft and melodic, even through the pain. She held up one small hand as if to protect herself from what she thought was coming. Jack could see she was dying. Dark purple blood seeped from wounds all over her body, and her breathing grew weaker with each passing moment. Jack lowered his weapon. This was not a soldier or a threat. This was just a scared, injured child who had been left behind to die. He looked around to make sure he was alone, then knelt down beside her. The girl's eyes widened in surprise as Jack set his rifle aside and pulled out his medical kit. "It's okay," Jack said softly, though he knew she couldn't understand him. "I'm going to help you." He began cleaning her wounds with antiseptic. The girl cried out in pain, but didn't try to pull away. Jack worked carefully, treating each injury as best he could with his limited supplies. The girl watched him with growing wonder, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Jack's hands were gentle as he bandaged her wounds. He had done this many times for his fellow soldiers, but never for an alien. The girl's blood was a different color, but pain was universal. Jack could see the gratitude in her eyes as he worked. When he finished treating her wounds, Jack offered her some water from his canteen. The girl sniffed it cautiously, then took a small sip. She nodded and managed what might have been a smile. Jack helped her sit up more comfortably against the wall. The girl pointed to herself and spoke. A word that sounded like Lyra. Jack pointed to himself and said, "Jack." She repeated his name with her musical voice, and he found himself smiling. Despite the circumstances, Jack knew he should report this to his commanding officer. His orders were clear about what to do with enemy aliens. But looking at this small, broken girl, he couldn't bring himself to follow those orders. She was no threat to anyone. She was just a victim of the same war that had claimed so many human lives. Lyra seemed to sense Jack's conflict. She reached into her torn clothing and pulled out a small crystalline pendant. She held it out to Jack, speaking urgently in her own language. Jack took the pendant and examined it. It was beautiful, with an intricate pattern that seemed to shift and change as he looked at it. The girl pointed to the pendant, then to herself, then to Jack. Even without words, Jack understood. This was something important to her, something precious. She was giving it to him as a gift, perhaps the only thing she had left to give. Jack carefully put the pendant in his pocket. Lyra smiled and closed her eyes, looking more peaceful then. She had since he found her. Jack stayed with her as she rested, keeping watch and making sure she was comfortable. Hours passed. Jack heard voices in the distance as his squad continued their sweep of the facility. He knew they would find him eventually, and when they did, he would have to make a choice. He could turn Lyra over to his superiors, following orders and military protocol, or he could find a way to help her escape. Jack looked at the small alien, girl who had trusted him with her life. She had given him her precious pendant, believing he would protect her. How could he betray that trust? How could he sentence her to death when she had done nothing wrong? The voices grew closer. Jack made his decision. He gently woke Lyra and helped her to her feet. She was still weak, but she could walk with his support. Jack led her through the back corridors of the facility, away from where his squad was searching. They reached a maintenance shaft that led to the outer hull of the station. Jack helped Lyra climb through the narrow passage, following close behind. They emerged into a small cargo bay where several escape pods were stored. Most had been damaged in the attack, but one looked functional. Jack quickly powered up the escape pod and helped Lyra inside. The controls were simple enough for her to operate once she reached safe space. He programmed the navigation system to take her to the nearest neutral zone, a place where neither side claimed territory. Lyra looked at Jack with tears in her violet eyes. She spoke in her own language, but Jack understood the meaning. She was saying goodbye and thanking him for saving her life. Jack nodded and stepped back as the pod sealed itself. The escape pod launched silently into space, disappearing among the stars. Jack watched until he could no longer see it, then made his way back to the main facility. He would report that he had found no survivors in that section of the station. It was a small lie, but one he could live with as Jack rejoined his squad. He felt the weight of the crystal pendant in his pocket. He didn't know what it meant or why Lyra had given it to him, but he would keep it safe. Somewhere out there, a young alien girl was alive because he had chosen compassion over duty. The war would continue, and more people would die on both sides. But for once, Jack had saved a life instead of taking one. He had shown mercy to Entosh, enemy who turned out to be just another victim of the conflict. It was a small victory in a war full of defeats, but it was enough. Jack Collins had made a choice that would change both their lives forever, though he didn't know it yet. He had chosen to see the person behind the enemy, to show kindness in a time of hatred. It was the most human thing he could have done, and it would not be forgotten. The love between Jake and Zara grew slowly like a flower blooming in desert sand. They had been working together for almost a year when Jake finally found the courage to tell her how he felt. They stood together on the fortress balcony, watching the twin moons rise over the now prosperous settlement below. "I love you," he said simply, the words hanging in the cool night air like a promise. Zara turned to look at him, her golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I love you too," she replied, her voice soft but certain. "I have for months." They kissed then, two beings from different worlds sharing a moment of perfect understanding. But even as they held each other, both knew the terrible truth that hung between them. Their love was impossible in every way that mattered to their respective societies. "We can never have children together," Zara whispered against his chest. "Even if I were not infertile, our biology is too different. We cannot create life together." Jake held her closer, feeling the pain in her voice. "Maybe we can create something else," he said. "Something that will last longer than either of us." Over the following days, they talked about what that something might be. They had already proven that their ideas could transform communities, but they wanted to do more. They wanted to create a legacy that would outlive their bodies, something that would continue to make the galaxy better long after they were gone. "What if we had children that were not born from our bodies?" Zara suggested one morning as they walked through the settlement. "What if we raised young people who shared our values and could carry on our work?" Jake watched a group of young Vorthans working in the newly constructed school, their faces bright with enthusiasm and hope. These were the children of exiles and criminals, but under Zara's guidance, they were becoming something more. They were learning to think for themselves, to question authority, and to value all people regardless of their birth or status. "We could teach them everything we know," Jake said, the idea taking shape in his mind. "About leadership, about cooperation between species, about building a better future." "They would be our true heirs," Zara added, excitement growing in her voice. "Not bound by bloodlines or biology, but by shared purpose and values." Their first formal student was a young female named Lyra, barely 18 years old but already showing remarkable intelligence and compassion. Her parents had been executed for speaking out against the Empire's treatment of conquered worlds, leaving her alone and branded as a traitor's daughter. She had come to Zarian 7, expecting to live out her days in exile, but Jake and Zara saw something special in her. "You have a gift for engineering," Zara told her after watching her repair a complex mining machine with tools that were clearly inadequate for the job. "But more than that, you have the ability to see problems from new angles." Lyra looked up from her work, her purple skin darkened with grease and dust. "My father always said that the best solutions come from combining different ideas in unexpected ways." "Your father was wise," Jake said, settling down beside her. Would you like to learn more about combining different ideas? What followed was an intensive education that transformed Lyra from a skilled but untrained exile into something remarkable. Jake taught her about human technology and thinking patterns, showing her how to approach problems with flexibility and creativity. Zara instructed her in advanced Vorthan science and political theory, but also in the art of leadership and the responsibility that came with power. "Why are you teaching me all this?" Lyra asked one day after a particularly challenging lesson on interspecies diplomacy. "Because the galaxy needs people who can think beyond the old boundaries," Zara replied. "People who can see past the differences between species and focus on what we have in common." "But I am just an exile," Lyra protested. "No one will listen to someone like me." "That is exactly why they will listen to you," Jake said. "You have no investment in the old ways, no reason to preserve systems that do not work. You are free to imagine something better." As word spread about the remarkable education being offered on Zarian 7, more young people began to arrive. Some came from other exile colonies, others were refugees from planets devastated by war, and a few were simply young idealists who had heard stories about the princess who judged people by their character rather than their birth. Each new student brought their own unique perspective and skills. There was Marcus, a brilliant young strategist whose family had been disgraced for questioning military tactics. There was Elena, a gifted diplomat who had been exiled for suggesting that negotiation might be preferable to conquest. There was David, a technical genius who had been cast out for designing weapons that were too humane for the Empire's taste. Jake and Zara worked tirelessly to give each student what they needed. They taught them about human and Vorthan history, about the mistakes that had led to the current war, and about the principles that might prevent future conflicts. But most importantly, they taught them to think for themselves and to value cooperation over competition. "We are not trying to create copies of ourselves," Zara explained to Jake one evening as they reviewed lesson plans. "We are trying to create better versions of what we could have been." The students formed a close-knit community, supporting each other through the challenges of their education and the pain of their various exiles. They began to see themselves not as outcasts, but as pioneers, the first generation of a new kind of leader that the galaxy desperately needed. Lyra emerged as the unofficial leader of the group, her combination of technical skill and natural charisma, making her a bridge between different personalities and perspectives. She had absorbed Jake's lessons about flexibility and Zara's teachings about compassion, but she had also developed her own unique approach to problem solving. "I have been thinking about the communication barriers between humans and Vorthans," she told Jake and Zara during one of their evening discussions. "What if we could create a universal translation system that did not just convert words, but also conveyed emotional context and cultural meaning?" Jake felt a surge of pride as he listened to her describe her idea. She was thinking beyond simple technical solutions to address the deeper problems that cause conflict between species. This was exactly what he and Zara had hoped to achieve. "That is brilliant," Zara said, her eyes shining with excitement. "Such a system could prevent the misunderstandings that have led to so much bloodshed." As the months passed, their informal school became something more than just an educational institution. It became a symbol of hope for outcasts and idealists across the galaxy. Young people who had been rejected by their own societies found purpose and belonging in the community that Jake and Zara had created. The students began to call themselves the children of two worlds, honoring both their human and Vorthan influences. They developed their own traditions and rituals, combining elements from both cultures in ways that felt natural and meaningful. They were becoming something new, a hybrid culture that took the best from both species while discarding the worst. "Look what we have created," Zara said one evening as they watched the students working together on a complex engineering project. "They are not our biological children, but they are our true heirs in every way that matters." Jake nodded, feeling a deep satisfaction that was different from any military victory he had ever achieved. These young people will carry their values and ideas into the future, spreading the message of cooperation and understanding to worlds they would never see. "This is our legacy," he said, putting his arm around Zara. "Not in our blood, but in our beliefs. Not in our bodies, but in our dreams." As they stood together watching their students work, neither of them knew that their time of peace was drawing to a close. Forces were already moving in the capital that would soon threaten everything they had built. But for this moment, they were content to watch their children of two worlds prepare for a future that would be better than the past.